Good morning. Everybody awake? I don't want to be the drill sergeant, but just want to make sure that you make yourself comfortable. My name is Philipp Schöne. I'm working for a company called Axway. I'm based here in Germany, so I'm a non-native speaker. Please apologize any language mistakes that I will probably make. I'm pretty excited to have such a full room today. I hope that I can share some insights how we see best practices for web APIs in a DevOps world and the security and visibility requirements that we see with some of our customers. And let's try to approach the topic a little bit and look into the different aspects. When we talk with customers and partners, then we have basically the number one topic on today's agenda, which is try to be more digital. And this caused a lot of headaches for a lot of our customers and partners because the increasing number of customer touch points that have been created in the last couple of years created a lot of tension. If you spoke with people around 90s and 2000s, everything was kind of web-based. Website was the number one topic everybody tried to deal with at that time. So if you talk to people in the 90s, like, yeah, you know, websites, we don't know if internet is a real thing. Let's try to see if we get a website or shop. And if we talk with people today, it's pretty much everything around APIs. So if you had asked a company in the year 2013 if they have an initiative to have an API, they were like, yeah, you know, we don't know if APIs are really going to take off for externals. And now it's pretty much like, yes, for sure we are going to have an API. And some say, yes, sure, we have a public API, which is the other extreme area. So we have still some free seats here. There was one there, 2, 3 there. Make yourself comfortable. Guys, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you like to do some exercise and stay fit, I don't mind. So this creates tension for sure for a lot of departments, and usually APIs for internal use, that's not a big problem. If we take, for example, one of our customers, an automotive manufacturer, yes, they have a CRM, they have a mobile-to-mobile backend, and then they have different interfaces that they expose on those services. So they started to look into, for example, exposing an API that serves customer data, one API that serves contracts, and then they are able to expose that to the more public-facing side versus the internal opportunities, which are for sure not given to partners. And the same for the M2M backend. So you see there is already kind of a separation between internal and external. And then it started to become pretty complicated. They start to look into partners. And then Google Maps was there, and as well Sirius XM. It's not so well known here in Europe. It's a satellite FM company. So basically a value-added radio without advertisement and really high quality sound. And for sure, those services have interfaces too, and that's technically very interesting. But from the marketing or sales perspective, the real interesting thing is the single API consumer or customer experience that they would try to create. So you see, they have to start thinking about composite APIs, which is pretty much the next level. So thinking about implementing an API in a single place first, about the internal and external world, and then okay, composite APIs, next step. And if you look at the provider view, it even gets more complicated. For example, here, Sirius XM, for sure, they started to advertise their service on their own webpage, but they also partnered with car sharing or car rental company and tried to sell this as a value-added service. And now we have an external partner using your API that was designed probably for internal use. How do we deal with this? Then for sure, partner websites, internal partner websites, or even here BMW offering this at a 90 or 120 days trial for their new customers. So there is a whole variety of requirements that companies got after they started with this journey. And basically, from a technical perspective, this created a lot of demand for a kind of new architecture. And usually, the new architecture is not the one that we have in mind when we talk about Netflix, because those type of customers that we talk to are usually not greenfield. So they have kind of a legacy. They have a lot of systems in-house already, and they are trying to find out the best way to expose them in a meaningful way and try to monetize them going forward. So the explosion of consumers and the explosion of APIs, doesn't matter if it's legacy systems, microservices, and those type of things, raise a lot of concerns. Number one concern, if you are an established enterprise, security. Nobody wants to be on Spiegel Online or TechCrunch being hacked. Nobody. So security, number one concern. Then, if you are a decent size, people worry about, we need a central catalog. Control. Control is one thing that people don't want to lose. Auditing. If you are in finance, for example, auditing is a very high requirement too, for compliance reasons for sure. And then if you talk about external partners, you need to worry about how do I onboard them? From the technical perspective, as well as from the marketing perspective. How do I make sure that they have all the information they need? And then if partners leave the ecosystem, how do I offboard them? Onboard, very natural thing. Offboard, how do I deal with API keys that expire? Do I disable them? What is the impact, etc.? So, and if you start to think about embedding all that into your backend APIs, it's very natural that this has some disadvantages from our perspective. It leads to duplicated efforts. You need expert knowledge. For example, the API developer would have to necessarily know all the security implications that are out there in the wild. And that's pretty complicated in some cases. At the same time, if you have a specific authentication authorization protocol that you are enforcing for your partners, if you try to educate every internal developer to stick to that protocol, it becomes pretty complicated. As well, it slows down the delivery over time, and then it makes scaling very hard. Because, for example, think of if you change something for all your APIs, and you would have to do a rollout for all your APIs, because just the SAML protocol changes from version 1 to version 2. Good morning, then you have a big headache that you try to solve. And this is actually giving us the opportunity to talk with people about a layered approach. I mean, a layered approach is something that a lot of people have understood that it's a good idea to separate the duties. And an API management layer can help you with different things. So first, it allows you to catalog all your APIs. So you have a central place where those APIs are stored. You can look them up. Developers can see if an API already exists, what the latest implementation is, can look up the methods, can look up the inputs and outputs. The other one is the consumer registry. So I have a central place where all my partners or consumers are registered. I can look them up. I can see who's the contact person if I have done it in the right way. I can enable and disable them. And the enable and disable, for sure, authorization, authentication, very, very linked to the registry and the catalog for sure, to allow that. And then threat protection. I mean, that's a separate module for itself to be sure that we have the best security in place once we expose data via APIs. On top, if API usage is extended, then people have requirements to look into analytics. The growing demand of APIs starts to grow a demand for analytics because people want to see what's happening on the data channel. And we are going to talk about that in a second. Let's quickly look into API security. First, there has been a recent study about API security, and what we found interesting is that a lot of companies already have API management tools, but they don't seem to use them in the right way. Only 45% of the people who have an API management system, and that's 87%, have rate limiting in place, which is pretty much table stakes. Rate limiting or quota management for APIs is table stakes to prevent overloading the system. So it means 55% of the APIs are not protected, and it's very easy to overload the system. Just get a bunch of AWS servers up, write a small script, here you go. A lot of party in the security department over the weekend. So the security piece that an API gateway provides, it prevents against authorized access, it prevents against parameter manipulation, data harvesting, network interception. So there are a lot of free and open source tools available like Child's Proxy, where people reinvent or look into the data that you are transmitting between your consumers and the internal world. And actually, I myself had a system that was proprietary, and I asked the vendor, do you have an open API? And they said, no, we will never expose that. And it costed me 10 minutes to look into the WSDL definition after I have run a Child's Proxy to see how the mobile app works. So it's not that complicated. I was just asking them if they would be so nice to expose it. Yeah, for sure, this all can lead to disclosure of sensitive customer data. And again, nobody wants to be on the number one page at the usual internet sites. So the message that I would like to bring across: standard network firewalls do not protect against those things. Network firewalls are open on that specific port to allow access. That's it. Usually they don't take a look inside the payload. And then, like I said already, the increased usage of APIs creates an increased demand for visibility, and on different areas. If you look into the backend services and gateway, where the central places where your security is implemented, then for sure the ops people would like to know the health of the system. And the guy who's in charge of running the API management program would for sure like to see how many partners have signed up, who has access to the APIs, and if those partners converted well. And for sure, the developer who walks into the API portal would like to see if his APIs that he's using are performing well. And then on the mobile app side, for sure, there is a requirement to see, does the API perform well? Does the mobile app perform well? Do I have crashes caused by the API, delays, etc.? So there is a variety of visibility and data requirements to serve. And we have basically started to look into this and try to create meaningful data for those types of requirements that allow the relationship manager to look into what are the top applications, which are the people who basically have a problem using the APIs, allowing the product manager to have a perspective on the data. And I would like to share some very basic dashboards that are showing the health of an API. So somebody having not too much technical information can already see if there is something wrong. So he would be able to see all the APIs. Here he would actually see that this one here has an abnormal error rate, and he can basically drill down into this API. It provides some situational awareness, as you see here in the upper left. There is one API with a high error rate, so he can click into this and drill down. I'm just quickly going through that here. Then if he has selected an API, he gets more insights on that API over time. So saying, well, the average latency in the last 20 days has been 500 milliseconds and the usual error rate is 11. But your current error rate is 30, so there is obviously something wrong. And then he can start to drill down and investigate. At the same time, he's able to look into the top 20 applications, so you can very easily identify the impact. Which consuming application is affected? Who do I need to call and convince that I need maybe a little bit time to fix the problem? And then for sure he can drill down into each transaction, trying to see the data and what went wrong with the API call. Very helpful if you have a big system with a lot of transactions going on. So you might ask yourself, okay, what does that all have to do with DevOps? Well, in the beginning, if you start with such a platform, it's pretty easy. But if you try to tie that into your software delivery or API delivery chain, then it becomes a little bit more complicated, because you basically have your backend APIs that are somehow tied into the CI/CD chain. And then you say, well, okay, let's try to do the same with the security policies for each of the APIs. So you start to have security policies for each API. Hopefully you have a good template approach that you can reuse them. For sure, the next level is then the virtualized version of the API, so the version that you are exposing to your partners. And then on top of that, you have your consumers. So potentially you might want to tie that into your CI/CD chain too, because those contain the tokens, those contain the keys, and maybe they contain other information too. And that's just one stream. If you talk about staging, and that's not an unusual requirement, you are going to end up with multiple environments. So 1, 2, 3, that's the standard use case we have to deal with today. We have some extreme cases where people run like 6 or 12 environments just to make sure that they have tested each and everything, which is totally fine, but it makes it close to impossible to track that in a meaningful way if the tool does not support it right. And this basically raises the requirement that we hear very often to have a very consistent way of storing all that information, being able to build and deploy the configuration for those type of layers in a meaningful way, completely integrated into the DevOps world, into the DevOps ecosystem with zero downtime for sure, because nobody wants to break implementations. And then all the traceability and rollback requirements come along the way. So if we look into how we see that, basically we enable that with having a team development approach to develop and version the configuration that you can run on the platform. We have tied that into a continuous integration flow. So if a developer finalizes the development of a policy or security set, he can version that, and from the versioning system, we can start building a configuration set that is then tested. There are specific API test tools available in the market that allow you to systematically test your APIs. There is even one tool set available that does security-specific testing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then for sure, once you have finalized the test, everything is okay, you have no regression, you can move that, release it, and deploy it in the delivery chain. And basically, the message that I would like to bring across here is it's completely integrated with the standard tools. So for the versioning, we have support for Git. For the build process, we very often see Jenkins and Maven being used. For the release process, also Jenkins or Artifactory in a lot of cases. And then to deploy actually configuration, Chef, Ansible, Puppet, the usual suspects are around. So pretty much table stakes for us, but if you try to look at that as a newbie, that's pretty much, oh my God, that's a lot of moving pieces. So we talked a little bit about the security, about the visibility. What we have not talked about yet is how do I get an API? And that's pretty much something that we have started to worry about for quite some time. We still have some capabilities in the core product, but we acquired a company called Accelerator, who's owning the Titanium SDK, pretty much known by a lot of mobile developers. And those guys start to worry about connector and SDK framework that they created. So you see here on the left side what is called AeroBuilder. This AeroBuilder component allows you to connect into backend systems. Every connector is a Node.js app, and it's self-documenting. So when you start designing your API, you pretty much create the documentation along the way. And that's pretty powerful. It's wizard-based. You can enhance the data model that you are getting from the backend system. You can reduce it. You can even create composite APIs. And for sure, there are a lot of common requirements, like I would like to connect to a database, which is Microsoft SQL Server, or I would like to cache with Redis, or I would like to connect to Salesforce. Salesforce was for quite a long time a pretty headache for a lot of people. And therefore, I brought a video of one of my colleagues who basically starting to show how the connection to Salesforce works. So I hope the video is playing. Oh yeah. Okay, so he's in AeroBuilder. You see here he has already connected a Salesforce. He's clicking into the Salesforce account method, and then you see how much data Salesforce is exposing to you. And you don't necessarily want to give all that data to your partner or internal users. just by having the API key. So what he's doing is he's creating an abstracted API on top of the Salesforce API, naming it My Account, and he's selecting Reduce the Existing Model because he just wants to expose a certain data set of that Salesforce API. And now we can select all the fields that are available here, selecting the name, in this case, the type, and does he select the phone number, and add those fields to his API definition. And then for sure he can select if and how those endpoints should be exposed, if there should be a CRUD method or just a read method or whatever, and then he can save it. And as you see here, you directly have a documentation on the left side with the accounts. So you see the method get my account to retrieve the data, post my account, get details on the account, and then you already have the HTTP endpoint as well as here sample code to execute the API call. In this case, it's Node.js code, or here you have the direct response from the backend inside the browser, so the developer has a very good perspective on what the API would deliver as a result once it's called. Building an API is one thing, but you need to run that too. And that's where microservices play a huge role. So if you have started to build your APIs with the model wizard, with the connector SDK that we provide, or possibly you took a connector from the marketplace, the next question that you have is, oh, how do I run that in a meaningful and scalable way? And that's where the Aero Cloud provides some services to run the connectors on-premise or on the cloud for you, depends on where the data source is. So there is a private option where you have that in-house, and there is a public option where you run that in the public Aero Cloud. And to have that as a complete overall picture, you have the what we call system of innovation and differentiation, where you have the connectors with Aero, where you can create APIs. Then you take them, register them into the API manager, secure them with the gateway, potentially expose them in a kind of self-service way to your partners and developers, and give it to the outside. So that's the left side of the picture here. Or if you have native APIs from the cloud, for sure you can register them and enforce governance on those APIs too. There is no reason to go through the accelerator Aero Cloud, but it depends a little bit on the use case. And I'm pretty much at the end of the presentation. I would like to invite you to come to our booth downstairs. There is basically a t-shirt available for most of you. I hope we have enough. Yeah, probably yes. And we have a prize draw. So what we do very regularly is we do kind of hands-on workshops with potential customers and partners and explain the technology in-house with real-life examples. So really hands-on. And you can basically come down or send an email to contact@germany@axway.com to get signed up for this prize draw, so that we can that you can probably win this API workshop. Yeah, and that was pretty much it. I'm opening it up for questions, or if you have a further question, for sure, I'm there per email or the usual social channels. So thank you very much. No questions? Awesome. Either I told a complete mess, or maybe, okay.
Yeah. What is the latency that this API manager adds to the API?
So the question was, I'm just repeating it because there are some people in the back. The question was, how much latency does such a layer introduce to the overall system? It pretty much depends. Yeah, it depends on what checks you do. Those systems are optimized for high throughput. It's in the milliseconds. If you start to do content transformation, for example, we have customers who have SOAP or XML APIs and would like to transform them into REST APIs, and then they would like to have security and reach out to a backend system to check tokens and those type of things. This is for sure increasing the latency, but in general, it's in the milliseconds. The good thing is that with this visibility piece, you are pretty much able to tell which step in the policy flow did cause how many milliseconds of delay. So if somebody comes and complains about delays, you can walk in and say, you know, we have a requirement to interface with Oracle Access Manager to retrieve username and password or tokens, and that's causing us 100 milliseconds every time a call is happening. Then you can have a conversation with the Oracle guys, for example, or CA or whoever, or you talk about, can we cache that properly because we have caching on board? Do we need to change the integration or whatever? So it allows you to have visibility on those calls, which is also pretty helpful in most of the cases. Further questions? Okay, cool. Another one. Yeah, sure.
And I'm not working for it.
No, he's not. Otherwise, he would have a T-shirt already.
Exactly. The question is, do you also orchestrate APIs with these?
Yes. Yes.
How does it work?
Okay. The question was if we are able to orchestrate APIs. Yes, we have different ways to orchestrate APIs. One very common requirement is to expose a web service and then link that to a JMS system. And then once you have a response from the JMS queue, trying to look something up at a different API and then create a composite response. So that's a very common requirement. There is a tool set available which is called Policy Studio, where you create what we call policy. So basically it's the flow, the data flow. So you would then have different steps in a one-by-one manner, where you say, okay, step number one is I would like to connect to JMS. Okay, good. Then I get the response. Next step is take that artifact from the XML with an XPath, load that into a variable. The next step is take that variable, challenge it towards the backend system, take the response, and then the last one is create the final response and send that back to the client. So it's pretty much a step-by-step guide. It's really like a drawing in Visio, if that helps. And that's something that a lot of customers like because it's so visual. So the documentation, if somebody has not implemented that policy or flow himself, he can walk into the config and see it. And if the developer has done a good job with proper naming, he can pretty much understand what's happening even if he has not implemented it. And the same names that you put on the different steps are also reflected in the monitoring. So the ops people can call into the developers and say, you know, we have a problem with step reach out to backend system ABC because we see a delay. Can you please have a look what's happening there? And then the developer knows exactly which part of the policy is causing a potential problem. Okay. 3 minutes left. If you want to go, that's pretty much. I appreciate your time. I hope you took something away with it. We are around today and tomorrow. Feel free to stop by our booth, and I would like to wish you a nice remaining or rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.